In the Gospel of John, in chapter 3, we hear John state that Jesus did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. And in chapter 8, which is our gospel for this week, we hear about the woman caught in adultery, and we see Jesus as an incarnation of that promise that he did not come to condemn, but he came to bring us life. That comes to life in a very real way for that woman. And this is considered to be a very true story, although it's out of place in the gospel. It's a very true story that happened in Jesus' lifetime. Jesus is set up by the Pharisees and the scribes. They bring this woman who's been caught in the act of adultery, and they want him to entrap himself, and he refuses to do that. Instead, he turns the table on those who would be the judges, those who would condemn this woman. And in so doing, he puts the ball back in their court and basically says, you are going to have to straighten this out. And he does that by, first of all, refusing to answer them. He also does it by not engaging their questions directly. Instead, as we heard in the passage from John's Gospel, he writes in the dirt on the ground. We don't know what he wrote, but it was enough for those who were watching him to be concerned about what was being written. And they push him, they still want him to answer, and he just continues to write again. And finally he stands up and says, let the one without sin be the first to cast a stone. And they all begin to walk away. And what is happening here is Jesus is revealing to them their own sin. He is saying, you are sinful people, just like this woman is a sinful person. And if you think you're better than her, then go ahead, cast that stone. And they all walk away, knowing their sinfulness. Meanwhile, he's left with the woman who knows her sinfulness, quite obviously. And he says to her, has no one condemned you? She says, no. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. And in that, he is offering her the gift of forgiveness. She's recognized her sin, and now she can be freed from that sin. And this is a point that's very important for us to take into account. When Jesus says to her, I don't condemn you, he doesn't stop there. He doesn't just say, okay, the sin is gone. He proceeds to say, now you can go, but from now on, do not sin again. The gift that he gives her, the gift that Jesus gives us in forgiveness, is not just a wiping of the slate. It is also an invitation to a change of heart, a change of the way we live our lives, a change to turn back to God and right our relationship with God, right our relationship with others, and right our relationship with God's creation. Interestingly enough, in revealing the sinfulness of the Pharisees and scribes, Jesus is offering them the same thing. He wasn't condemning them. He didn't wag his finger at them. He just said, if you're without sin, fine. But they knew they were not without sin. They had sin in their hearts. They had the sin of murder, the sin of malice, the sin of manipulation. They were setting up this whole thing at the expense of this woman. And Jesus knew that, and they knew that. They walked away. They didn't accept the gift that was offered to them like we're supposed to accept a gift that's offered to us. It's always there for us. If we acknowledge our sin, we can be forgiven and we can have a change of heart by God's grace. It is important, I think, to throw into this mix a little bit a dynamic that goes on then and a dynamic that goes on today. The woman was caught in the act of adultery. That means there was somebody else there who did not get dragged before Jesus. Double standard then, double standard now. We need to make sure that when we are looking at our sinfulness, that we're using the same standard for ourselves that we're using for everybody else. As we continue our Lenten journey, I invite all of us to open our hearts to the Lord, Open our hearts so that Jesus can see what's in there, heal what's in there, make us whole, and give us the grace so that we can walk more closely with him and with our Father in heaven. Thank you.